Welcome to Bible Study. This is the Bible study I am preparing for September 1st in 2024 at St. Michael's Lutheran Church. We're coming to the end of this summer season. It is Labor Day weekend, and that means we're going to be coming to the end of this Bible study in response to questions that people are raising about Lutheran belief and practice, and particularly practices at St. Michael's. If you have others of those, we will, I'm sure, bring this question up, this opportunity up at another time. We'll be doing this maybe for another week, but then we want to start doing actually a text of the Bible. I think that's probably for our Bible study something that is probably a little more conducive for the edification of people. And so we want to resume a study of a text of the Bible, Old or New Testament. If you would have something you would really like to study, you would like to know more about, please let me know, and we will begin working on that and preparing and get a Bible study together for us. For this week, though, we want to continue with some of these questions. And one of the questions that was asked was regarding the relationship of Christianity to the Jews, to the Old Testament people. And particularly, it was the question of supersessionism, which is the understanding that Christianity has replaced the faith of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, and Isaiah, and the rest of the characters of the Old Testament, has replaced that faith with a different faith. It has superseded that faith. And that has been a long-standing position of a lot of Christians for a very long time. However, the last 100 years or so have seen Christians perhaps reassessing that. This question has become even more pertinent with the recent political unrest surrounding the incursion into Gaza and the raid upon Israel by the Hamas militants in October of last year and the ensuing conflict. But that is merely reflective of what is a longer process of what is happening. So let's just first start by laying out the groundwork of what we're talking about here. Initially, it was more or less assumed, but not really well articulated, that Christianity had replaced Judaism, a true supersessionist kind of position. If you read Augustine, if you read Irenaeus, if you read the church fathers of old, many of them will speak that way. Now, Augustine he couches that a little bit differently. He says, no, that in fact the Jewish faith has some role to play. But most of the Christian community, up to right around the 1700s, were saying as much. In the days of the Enlightenment, another idea started to come forward. And it was told as a sort of parable of a king who had 3 sons. And the right to rule was vested in the possession of this certain ring. You can think Tolkien, Lord of the Rings sort of thing. He had a ring that made him the king. It was a magic ring. The king had 3 sons. Which one was going to get the ring? Well, the day came and the king died. And the 3 sons came together and they each reached into their pocket and pulled out a ring. They were identical. And they said, which one is the real one? And no one knew. In the Enlightenment, we see this idea that Christianity and Judaism and Islam are simply different pathways to the same place, and that they each come with the same sort of authority and truth behind them. That neither of them can make a claim to absolute truth. All of them have truth. And this idea has, in large part, gripped much of Western culture to this point. If you ever see a coexist bumper sticker out there, that's what's going on there. As a confessional Lutheran, I do not subscribe to this. Right? I do not think that there is simply various pathways to God. Now, as a confessional Lutheran, I also say God is able to save whoever he wants. And that is his decision and not mine. I think too often we have, as Christians, gotten sometimes into the business of doing God's job, and that is telling people that they're not saved. No, my job is to bear witness to the fact that Christ has saved everybody, and that I need to proclaim him and let him worry about who believes and who does not. But I only can proclaim a salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. There is no other proclamation that I have. Could God save other people if he wants? Yes, of course he could. He's God. It's his heaven. He gets to do that. I don't get to make those rules. He does. But he has only given me to say this, that by faith in Jesus Christ, you have a promise that Jesus has forgiven you all your sins. So on one side, we stand in opposition to a kind of religion that says that there is no truth, that all of us have a piece of the truth and that there is no truth. No, we reject that. There is truth. God has revealed himself. There is something for us to say, and it's vitally important. But on the other hand, you sometimes have problems that look the other way. And part of what has happened in response to the Enlightenment's idea of no real truth has sometimes been a doubling down on the part of Christians. And this is where I was saying we sometimes try and do God's job for him. Well, we don't need to do that. We are witnesses. We are not judges. God is the judge. I am not. And so what has happened is sometimes people have espoused a supersessionism, a kind of supersessionism, which I think also is not really what is found in the Bible. This has then been complicated over the last 100 years or so with the rise of a movement known as dispensationalism. Supersessionism is kind of a covenantal theology. It says that there was an old covenant and there's a new covenant, and that the old covenant has been superseded by the new covenant. So when Jesus says, "Take and eat, this is my blood, my body of the new covenant, my blood of the new covenant," that he's really saying, I'm replacing the old. Now I'm going to question that. I'm going to say that's not really what he's saying there, but that's the way supersessionist theology has thought about this. That covenantal understanding of the reading of the Bible has been challenged in the last 100 years by another group known as dispensationalism. And dispensationalism lives in a bit of a fringe in the North American religious scene. It understands that there have been sort of epochs when different covenants or different ideas of the way that God dealt with people obtained, and that we are now in the dispensation of the church, and that a day will come when another dispensation will come, and that is the dispensation of the millennium. This is this is where you get some of the ideas that float around in contemporary American evangelicalism, which would propose that the reestablishment of the nation of Israel is somehow key to the arrival of that next dispensation. that these are the fulfillment of certain prophecies which they identify in places like Revelation and Daniel, in which Jerusalem will be refounded and the temple will be rebuilt and the nation will be restored, and those are preconditions for the second coming of Christ. And that has oftentimes resulted in an American political support for what's going on in Israel that is not necessarily based on, policies of the United States, but is in fact based upon a theology, a reading of the Bible itself. And so whenever we ask this question of what is the Christian relationship to the Jews, it has pressure, or it has pitfalls running on all sides of it. The strongest argument for a supersessionist position comes from the letter to the Hebrews. And the letter to the Hebrews is a document in which an unknown author, we do not know who wrote this book, was endeavoring to speak to what we think were a group of Jewish Christians, likely coming out of priestly families. And they were feeling somewhat disenfranchised because in the Christian movement, just because your last name was Cohen, you were a priest, did not make you automatically a position of authority, did not automatically give you this place and privilege in the society. And so these priests were really having second thoughts. They were thinking about going back to old Judaism, which did say, well, you are a priest. And the writer to the Hebrews is writing to dissuade them from that course of action. And so he's saying, don't go back. Rather, remember that being a Christian is a higher place than being a priest in the old way. And his primary argument for that comes in chapters 9 and 10, where he says that those old things we used to do, those sacrifices that required your priesthood, those were all signs pointing ahead to Jesus. But now that Jesus has come, to continue to do those old signs is a little akin, and I'm gonna use a different image than he does here, is a little akin to having a picture of somebody that you love, which is a valuable thing when they are gone. But then when they have returned from their trip and all of a sudden they're in the room with you, it's as if you are still looking at the picture instead of actually talking to them. He's not so much invalidating the picture as he is pointing to a more fulsome reality with that. But along the way, he says something here at the end of chapter 8 of Hebrews. He says, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. That sounds rather cut and dry, doesn't it? That means that the old is obsolete and it's vanishing away. But when you read the rest of the book and you take it in that sense that I just described, that isn't necessarily what he's actually saying there. He is not speaking to that the picture is invalid. I still have pictures of people that live in my home and I have them hanging on my wall. That doesn't make them inappropriate. And sometimes they tell me things about that person that remind me of something that even in their presence is hard to see. No, I think perhaps the better way to run this is really through the experiences of the Apostle Paul. If you remember, Paul was a white-hot enthusiast for Pharisaical Judaism, so much so that he was persecuting the people of God. Jesus confronted him on a road to Damascus as he was on one of his persecuting missions, and the light of Christ helped him see another way. And he became an equally ardent promoter of the very Christianity he had been persecuting. But in that process, Paul will never use the language of conversion. He will never say that he has joined a new religion. In fact, when you read his books carefully, you discover that he really envisions that his Christian faith is in fact the fulfillment and the continuation of the Jewish faith that he had before. He never, in all of his writings, speaks of his Christianity as a different thing than his Judaism. Now, he says he's gone through tremendous changes, and in large part he's going to say because the Judaism of the first century had itself kind of gone off the rails. And he will regularly point to Old Testament passages, not so much to say that, this is a new thing, see, but no, that in fact Christianity is the authentic form of Judaism. And that's probably where I think recent scholarship would maybe have me go instead. That the difference is not between Old Testament Judaism, New Testament Christianity, but the difference is really between Christianity and a first century, Second Temple Judaism that had veered off course and was no longer reading its Torah, no longer reading its prophets in a way that comported with what they were actually saying. Probably the place to go with that, and there's a number of places in Paul's letter where he references this. I mean, here in chapter 3 of Philippians, as I'm looking at it right now, he's got a sense here. He's talking, watch out for the people who are trying to get you to be circumcised again, or to be circumcised. He says, though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh also, if anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence, I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. As to the law, a Pharisee. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. As to righteousness under the law, blameless. But whatever gain I had, now notice he doesn't say my faith I count as rubbish, but whatever gain I had as a Pharisaical persecuting Jew, I count that now as rubbish and loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ. It's not only my old Judaism that I think that way. I think of everything that way. My whole former life. That I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith. What Paul will assert here and elsewhere is that in fact, that is authentic and true Judaism. A little red passage in the letter to the Romans is found in chapter 4. So if you got your text, open to Romans chapter 4 now. Here, right after he has done his amazing sort of a statement of the thesis of the whole book, in which he says a righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law, although the law and the prophets bear witness to it. This is really important. The Torah still speaks to us. The Torah still is our Bible. The righteousness of God through faith of Jesus Christ for all who believe, for there's no distinction. There's no distinction between sinner, this sinner and that sinner. We're all sinners. But in chapter 4, he goes into a illustration of his point. And he uses the character of Abraham from the Old Testament. What shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh? If Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. What he's saying here is that to his fellow Jewish members of the Jewish ethnic group who do not believe in Jesus, he's saying, guys, you haven't read your Torah. You, in fact, are not being good Jews. You are not being good followers of the Torah, readers and adherents of the covenant that Moses established at Sinai. Now to the one who works, his wages are not counted, but as a gift, but as his due. To the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. David also speaks of the blessing of the one to whom God counts as righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. His logic in this passage is very interesting. Is this blessing then only counted for the circumcised? Do you have to do this do you have to be Torah observant in the way that the Jewish people understand Torah observance? We say that faith is what counted to Abraham as righteousness. How was this counted to it? Was it before or after he was circumcised? He's doing a very intense reading of the Torah, and that passage, it was reckoned to him as righteousness. That Abraham believed and it was reckoned to him as righteousness from Genesis 15 comes before the command to be circumcised. Paul's argument in this whole thing is that being a Christian is, in fact, being an authentic adherent of Old Testament faith. His problem is that the Jewish community of the first century, and I would argue subsequent centuries as well, isn't reading their Torah well. They are not actually doing it. So what is our relationship to a Jewish person that way? What is the thing we would say? Probably something more akin to, not that they have a faith in the wrong God, no, nor is their relationship to God something that is an unmitigated evil. But it is really the kind of relationship you might have to somebody who has, I guess, applied for baptism, but hasn't got there yet, hasn't been catechized yet, has not been received. I have to acknowledge that in the last 2,000 years, a deeply bitter history obtains between Christianity and Judaism, and I have to, in the same way as I would maybe somebody who has been hurt by the church and who is sitting in my confirmation class and is coming with bitter questions, that I need to think about that gently and carefully. Christianity doesn't speak of superseding or converting Jews, Judaism nor converting Jews. It speaks of completion. It speaks of taking a faith that is rooted in Torah and prophets and opening eyes to see that Torah and prophets are speaking about Jesus. We'll talk more about this on Sunday, I pray. And if you're able to come, please do. 9 o'clock, here at St. Michael's. You're always welcome. God bless you. Bye-bye.